Hey, we're live. This is the pre-show before we record Never Stay Dead, which we will start at some point. I'm here with, for those who don't know, his august personage, Matt, also known as Agent 42Q, also known as Wednesday Serial, also known as the better half of Untold Talks of Spider-Man, or the lesser half, I'm not sure which. But.
And the lesser half of Never Stay Dead, but the greater half of Never Stay Dead is obviously Damien Sleepy Reader, the Dark Lord. Damien.
I am not the mastermind of Never Stay Dead. So
who is?
Oops, I keep pointing the wrong way. So, well, actually, we don't know who came up with all of our ideas of Never Stay Dead, but I think of Matt as like 55% of Never Stay Dead.
You do the editing. I'm happy to give you another
work.
Yeah, that you get majority at that point. You do the work. So
we have a 64-page special here.
Hey, Masked Panther.
Excited because things are actually showing up in the subscription feed right now. They weren't for a while. So yeah, hopefully a few of my subscribers will see this, and our Twitter followers. Weird Dad is here. I think Weird Dad is new to me, or maybe
he's new to me. Hello.
And he says current DuckTales is amazing. That's kind of like Untold Tales of Spider-Man. DuckTales. They're all tales.
Well,
when I talk about Untold Tales of Spider-Man, for those who don't know, it is a podcast, part of a network of Spider-Man podcasts.
Well, Untold Tales is actually a Kurt Busiek run that intersects with the Steve Ditko run. But Untold Tales is the podcast.
Untold Talks is the podcast. You just said
yes. I see. You messed me up. And you know, part of what it was is a couple months ago, I just read through Untold Tales for the first time, and I still haven't read some of those Ditko issues, so it's a trip.
Did Busiek write for Ditko?
No. So the Untold Tales like intersects between the lead Ditko run, but it's mostly
they have a few artists all like interleaved, and then you would get the full.
Yeah, effect. But I just read Untold Tales straight, which was more fun because I think
after you named your podcast after it.
Yeah.
The mighty Masked Panther is here. One of our more veteran YouTubers.
It's true.
Who's made a comeback lately.
Oh, nice.
So what were we talking about before we went live? Going live kind of interrupts the brain flow.
Comics.
No, we couldn't have been talking about that. So you've been splurging on eBay. I think you mentioned that in the last time we talked, but I guess it's gotten worse.
Yeah, yeah.
Has anything arrived yet?
So Spider-Man 2099 arrived a little while ago, and I've finished reading through that. It dives off at the end, but there's some fun stuff in there. I got X-Men 2099. I haven't touched. I got issues 1 through 10 of the Grant Morrison Green Lantern run. And then as far as what's coming, I think I talked about New Warriors. That's slated to arrive soon. Cheaper shipping, which thank God, because that's about 200 books. So
how much do you think you paid per issue?
Oh, less than $1.
Cool.
Or maybe less than 50 cents per. Like, really, yeah.
Right.
I also got volume, I think it's 3 of Green Lantern, the one where Kyle Rayner shows up, like the entirety of that volume, though no annuals. So just the 180 comics, I want to say, of that run, and some of the Green Lantern Rebirth, and then I think any new 52 title that had Green Lantern in it.
Which is not
Red Lanterns.
Oh, you did not? I thought you did get Red Lanterns. I thought
I got new. What is it? What was the kind of Kyle Rayner one? New Guardian, whatever. Then Core and just GL proper. Guys, might have spent a little too much on that. I've spent damn near $500 on eBay comic
all
purchases.
For cheap comics.
Yeah. Oh, and I got Green Lantern Mosaic too. I was at it.
I remember really liking that a lot, but I can't remember why.
I've heard great things. So,
And is that have what's the artist name? Bright doing it? The guy who also did
I haven't seen one yet, so I can't say.
the artist who did the Quantum and Woody that you like so much.
Oh God, yeah.
He had a good Green Lantern run at some point back then.
You know, it's funny. I loved Quantum and Woody, but they've rebooted it, I feel like, twice in recent years. And I just no interest. I don't know.
I think with humor magazines, it's harder to recapture the humor of the previous run.
Yeah.
Just like I found the same thing with Archer and Armstrong, which was also a humor comic of a more subtle, relatively speaking, humor comic than Quantum and Woody.
What was the last comic book that made you laugh?
I don't know. I was rereading some Gru, so that made me laugh.
There you go. Okay, cool.
Mass Panther says, can you imagine if Grant Morrison wrote some DuckTales stories? Mind-blowing.
I'd be curious.
There's a lot of people I'd like to see what they would do with DuckTales. What would Matt Kint do with DuckTales? Or
don't know if I want to see that.
Jeff Johns. Agu Ramos is here. Agu, I think I met you right at Frankenstein's. I think that's the same person. And I can't remember your real name anymore. It'll come to me later. So should we dive in? Tonight we're going to talk about a 6-issue Max miniseries from Marvel back in 1999 or 2000 or something like that.
Yeah, I thought it was a little later, like post 2000.
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, it is definitely, because there's some in the first issue. There's some 2001 event reference.
Oh, it's useless for me on Comixology. It says it was released 2014, which obviously was not when it was released.
Yeah, no. I think it was like my trade says 2007, so
so it was kind of later on in the Max comics. So it's a It's a one of the interesting things about it is it's a Brian K. Vaughan comic.
Yeah, you might have heard of him from Why the Last Man or Saga or some other like no-name comic no one's heard of, right?
When was Why the Last Man? Is this before Why the Last
Man? I have no clue. I think it was after.
Huh.
I think.
Well, since we're talking about it, maybe we should do our official Never Stay Dead intro. Because we are going to release this as a podcast.
Okay. Hello, Dark Avenger C86 and ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, you apparently are neither. Welcome to Never Stay Dead.
A special live edition on YouTube, internet.
Yeah.
Version. So it will not be much edited after the fact.
Can we get the live audience to cheer? Hey, Jack.
Hey, Jack, yo. We may respond to comments less as we're discussing the comic book in our podcast style. But for those listening afterwards, we are getting live comments coming through from a few viewers. We have 8 people watching at the moment.
Wow. That's more views than I get on my recent videos, so we're doing all right.
You're a popular man. Do you want to tell the folks out there in podcast land what we're going to talk about tonight?
Today we are talking about Max Marvel Comics. Somewhere in the 2000s sensation from Brian K. Vaughan and Kyle Holtz, The Hood. Darker exploration into the seedy side of Marvel, and in a way kind of a a play on a Spider-Man-esque origin, but for a villain.
True. I hadn't thought of that. He is kind of like a villainous Peter Parker.
Mhm.
And I mean, what was particular when Matt suggested this to me, what jumped out at me right away was Brian K. Vaughan. Oh, I had no idea he did this comic, and he's one of the most, currently famous writers in comics and most popular writers in comics.
Except he hasn't turned out an issue in like, what, a year?
Right. But he still looms large, I would say. And everyone's breathlessly awaiting his return.
Which will be maybe further delayed given pandemic events.
Right.
Oh God! What
On
if
the
he
other
dies
hand,
before?
Kyle Hotz, not many people know about him. Is he the same guy who's now appearing in some DC comics? Like that Spectre issue of Detective Comics? Is that the same guy? I think so. And if he's the same guy, he just recently did an issue of Justice League Dark.
That's
but
cool.
Maybe I'm thinking of someone named Holt. I'm not sure if it's Holtz or Hotz. I'm thinking
of. He did do some Detective Comics recently.
Okay.
Yeah, he did a Web of Venom issue recently.
So I think his style has changed quite a bit from here. Although you can see in this one a bit of that Kelly Jones art style that is also still noticeable in his current artwork.
Oh, he did the art for the worst issue of Agent X.
Oh, well, that's something. Anyway, he clearly has not become as famous as Brian K. Vaughan.
Yeah.
No. But maybe Brian, so we couldn't figure out when Why the Last Man happened, which is another one of Brian K. Vaughan's very famous comics.
So The Hood is 2002.
Oh, 2002. Okay.
And then Why the Last Man is 2008. So this is before.
Okay. So he had not really made a name for himself then, at least to the larger comic book audience.
Yeah.
Since I was not paying any attention to Matt's comics, I don't know what the reaction to this was at the time.
Oh, who cares about your TV show? Sorry, I'm looking at Runaways to see when that was. 2003. Oh, wow, so this predates Runaways even. So yeah, this was him earning his way into comics because I believe he'd done some TV before this. So
yeah, so there's a look for those watching on video. There's a look at Kyle Holtz's artwork. I think it gets better as the series continues.
That's fair. I think I think the art overall is just great in this. And then I just wanted to know.
You think it's great, you said?
Yeah, I think it fits the book well. It's consistent.
I had mixed feelings.
Yeah, okay.
Like I wasn't crazy about the way he drew faces, but
I mean, I don't know.
I guess I was being a bit picky.
I can always tell who people are, and I can always pick up the emotion that I need to be getting out of them. It's not always my favorite look, I guess, but I mean, as far as what I'm looking for in a comic book, like it's certainly did what it was supposed to be doing. I don't know.
And overall, I think it grew on me, and I think the art got better as it went along.
It is a little overly expressive, I guess, which is weird for like a Marvel comic. But I thought I kind of dug it. It just it had some flair, some style, some fun. It punched up a lot of these talking head moments, which there are a lot of in this comic. So,
and to spoil the plot, which we do on this show, it's about a small time hood or thug, even maybe, who he and his cousin do burglaries and robberies, and they also beat up people and piss on them and steal their shoes. And
yeah, they're hoodlums. They're no good.
They really have very little care about anyone else, except the guy cares about his mother, who's, I guess, in an insane asylum of a sort, or a nursing home / psychiatric hospital. And he has a hooker who he sees regularly, and he has a girlfriend who's pregnant. And as the story develops, we realize he cares about his cousin, I guess.
Well, but So he cares about the people close to him to varying degrees and
Right.
varying ways. But
But even
so
there, his caring for them has a kind of shallow feel about it.
well, it does. But what's interesting about that as we get into it, I guess we might as well just dive in, is the parallel, like I said, between him and Peter Parker. Because when you start looking at this guy who's a scumbag, and you start looking at him ditching people and avoiding them and doing some questionable things around them, you think, what a douche. But then you
Right.
you take a step back, and if you compare him to Peter Parker is running out on Aunt May constantly,
Started as a
running.
douche.
Yeah,
Put it that way.
and
Before it
original
comes
Peter
back.
Parker was more jerky. You could see why people didn't like him,
Right.
especially when Steve Ditko had the reins of writing him. And uh,
So
you can draw a lot of parallels and maybe see that, like, intentions and outputs, are going to color your intentions. Because when like, he's going to be Spider-Man, you think one thing. When this guy is going to be the Hood, in a way, he's bringing that back to the people closer to them and actually should make their lives better. It's an interesting way to look at it, because I think
before we jump too far ahead, let me say that he and his cousin rob a warehouse.
Mhm.
Some strange alien or demon appears,
Demon. It's
and
definitely demon.
well, they call it a demon, but we have never get an explanation within
Well, it's
these
clearly
60.
mystical, though, not
It
extraterrestrial,
wasn't
with the
clear to me.
hieroglyphs and
So
the demon chanting and supernatural powers.
I guess I didn't catch that. Or I didn't feel sure of that. But anyway, they kill the demon or seem to kill the demon, and he steals the demon's shoes and its cloak, thinking he'll be able to sell it, but then finds the shoes and the cloak give him superpowers. The shoes make him be able to walk on air, and the cloak allows him to become invisible while he's holding his breath, which I thought was brilliant. So
Oh,
and he's a smoker, so he can't hold his breath very long.
I'm gonna have to correct you on one thing. It's not a cloak; it's a hood.
It's a hoodie cloak, I suppose. There's probably a proper term for it from the medieval ages. And then he sets out to become to pull off bigger scores, to be a minor supervillain. And in the course of it, accidentally kills a cop and steals diamonds from a big mobster who hires supervillains to work for him.
Mhm.
And through a bunch of shenanigans, his cousin gets blamed for the murder, gets pulled into jail, and some FBI people are investigating. They want to bring down a costumed villain to make the FBI look better, and ultimately he outsmarts everybody, partially by accident, partially in the end by actually using his brains. So we do see him become a smarter supervillain and someone who, to some extent, takes care of his own inner circle,
Well,
being
again,
his cousin and his pregnant girlfriend a little bit.
we see him compared to Peter Parker, where in this situation he figures out what needs to be done. He's reacting to the situation. He's clever, he's smart, but he's not like knowledgeable. He's not science smart. So it's a bit of a
Right.
different thing. But he's like a really crafty criminal, and we see that from the get-go. Even
Really?
when they're robbing shoes off people, yeah, he is pulling back on his cousin at the right times and pushing at the right times. He's definitely aware of the situation, and he has the right instincts. He's like criminally intelligent, not necessarily like scientifically or otherwise. So he's able
Really?
to
I
solve
didn't
it.
see that he was. He was a little smarter than his cousin, but I didn't. And he's kind of a shoot first guy.
I mean, he's aggressive, but you have to be a criminal like that to be pulling through the underworld. Have you never
I mean,
built your own criminal empire?
it didn't come back to haunt him yet, but they did beat up a Hydra agent, which
Oh,
may have been a bad move, and piss on him and steal his boots.
well, yeah, but they beat on him because he's basically a Nazi around right after 9/11.
Sort of, but they also are sociopaths who just don't think about the consequences of their
But they're
actions.
American sociopaths. Didn't you read Joker in that Superman? Oh no, it was Batman and Captain. Was it Batman Captain America, where the Joker makes a big deal about
I
being an
never read
American criminal?
that. They may be, but on the other hand, maybe it was just an excuse to beat someone up because they don't
Oh,
show any other. If if that's Vaughn's way of trying to show that there actually are sympathetic people despite being criminals,
it's a
nothing
blend.
nothing else comes forward to parallel that.
They're thugs, they're criminals, they're despicable, no question. But they're also pissed off about 9/11. They're New Yorkers, just like anyone else. So it's those intentions being blended in with the criminality. I mean, crimes happen because of motivation. I don't know. It's an interesting little moment that like played them despicably and somewhat sympathetically at the same time. I don't know. It was a very kind of Nick Spencer moment in a way.
Yeah. The art, as I've been flipping through the pages of the first issue, even by the end of the first issue, the art looks better to me, like this page I'm showing right here, where it does look like they're looking at mystical symbols and such. But who put out all these mystical symbols?
I mean, I assumed it was like a demon summoning circle, and I mean that is clearly a demon, not an alien. I know my Marvel aliens, and I know my Marvel demons. That's
Okay.
something out of the pages of
Well,
Ghost
you know
Rider,
more Marvel.
not Captain Marvel.
But here the art looks really good.
Yeah. Yeah, this
Jack
guy
Yo
draws
in our
really
comments mentions that he was reading this when it was coming out, and he looked at it as kind of a companion to Robert Kirkman's Irredeemable Ant-Man, which was about
Oh,
a villain in a comic also.
yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
yeah, I only read an issue or two of Irredeemable Ant-Man. I should go back and hunt that whole thing down.
I don't. You don't seem to like despicable characters that much, though.
That's true. Well,
Somewhat charming, despicable, I guess I should say.
I did not like these characters, and I do wish there was something more for me to hold on to emotionally here. But I did think it was kind of a cool comic. And I read it. I was not thinking of Peter Parker until you said it. I read it thinking of Ed Brubaker comics like Criminal and Sleeper and things like that. And it felt a lot like that to me.
That's fair. I always have Peter Parker on the brain. So, also the guy's name is
This
Parker
is a Marvel
Robinson.
comic.
So,
this is a Marvel comic, and it makes sense that, and it gives it more mythic weight if it's kind of a parallel to Peter Parker.
yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out why I feel a little more sympathy for the criminals in Ed Brubaker comics than I do in here. Maybe because in Ed Brubaker comics, they tie more closely into their childhood. And this has a little bit of that with the childhood friendship with the cousin. And that was kind of my favorite part of the book on a character level, was the relationship with his cousin.
Well, they're also set in a very different world, right? In Ed Brubaker comic, or at least the kind you're thinking of, not like his Captain America run,
Right.
But Criminal, they're set in a world where everybody's kind of morally gray, right? They're all somewhat compromised or trying to get through and doing what they can. Whereas we're in the world of Spider-Man and Captain America here. This guy gets superpowers and he doesn't try to reform himself. He just leans in.
Could walk into this comic book and read it as just a comic book about a morally gray world, because there are no superheroes appear. The FBI members are very morally gray. In fact, I liked that a lot. And when they said, "Oh, well, all our superiors are just hustling so that they can get jobs at SHIELD and move out of the FBI," I thought that was a great little toss away comment that gives you kind of an idea of what a lot of workplaces are like. When my wife worked at a local Oregon public radio and public TV station, the top people at that station were all angling to get jobs at bigger stations. So they would pour a lot of money into certain projects that would make them look good, but wouldn't necessarily get good ratings or be financially feasible. I mean, it made me immediately just think of that real life workplace kind of thing.
And I think that's something Vaughan does really well, is slip in these little details that help build the world so quickly. And they're just little lines, but they give so much flavor.
Yeah. And I thought, so the mobster villain, we never learn who his master is. He no longer works for he's called the Golem, but he's just a regular human being who's merciless. And he no longer works for the Kingpin, but someone is pulling his strings. So this was I slightly wish I cared a little more about the characters, but my biggest complaint in the end is all these loose ends that, were cut. It almost felt like the writer was putting them in there to make us feel like by the end of the story we will learn who what the real nature of the powers the Hood got are, where they came from, and what's going on with this main villain, and who's pulling his strings. There's another nice touch was that he has a daughter who's a mutant, and although he's like this utterly merciless mobster, he does whatever he spoils his daughter, and she forces him to go to see Broadway plays over and over again that he doesn't want to see, and he is the one thing he has sympathy for is he wants to hire more mutants on his staff for diversity.
Which I think that's kind of funny, because if you're in this kind of business, you should want to hire mutants. They have freaking supernatural abilities usually that are offensive. So,
that's true. But it's also a world of people who are very free in their prejudices. So we see the other supervillains misunderstand him and think he doesn't want mutants and put down mutants in various ways.
Oh, there's always going to be the bigots, right? Like the Friends of Humanity aren't hiring mutants, obviously, right. But the Kingpin should be, right? Because he's just being shrewd.
Right, but the other mobsters are the small-minded people, right? So you expect them to have small-minded. But are they only? So I think it was very appropriate. I really liked the way Electro and Pumpkinhead, or whatever his name is, etc., were anti-mutant.
It's Jack-o'-lantern.
Jack-o'-lantern. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Spider-Man calls him Pumpkinhead more than Jack-o'-lantern, anyways. So yeah. I don't know. It is funny that as soon as he gets invisibility power, he does the girls in the locker room thing.
Right. Yeah, I'm showing on the screen the girls. Shooters, IGIM. I assume that's a joke on Jim Shooter, but I don't know what IGYMI means. That's the name of the women's gym that he's going to. Shooters, I got you, my. I don't know. It probably stands for some inside joke on Jim Shooter. The previous publisher at Marvel Comics.
Why do people hate Jim Shooter? He tried to get them better pay and all this other stuff. I know he's a little over controlling, but
right. I think he was someone who made the trains go on time, and then at some point the power went to his head, or that's how other people felt.
Well, but Christopher Priest in his day was under his thumb and was pushing that too, and he got some of that heat as well.
Right. Well, and there were people who liked him, Shooter, and people who didn't.
Talk about a tangent.
Yes. Well, hey, it's in the comic. This is a rich comic. I mean, it's a rich but unsympathetic comic.
Oh, and did you notice the lettering?
I did not. Now let me look at the lettering. Why?
So it's the Ultimate Comics font.
Is it?
It is, which really threw me off because in recent Venom comics, that's a tell for when we have, what's his name, the Maker, the Reed Richards of the Ultimate Universe, or other characters when they come in. But it was just interesting to see, because it was just a font they were using at this point here, and it's a good font.
Right.
But it's just kind of funny because it has added weight now.
So where do you see him having a turning point the way Peter Parker did, of some sort?
In a way, but it's a darker twist, right? It's not a it's not a twist in that he's going to change anything. It's a twist in that he is enabled to take things to the next level. So instead of realizing with great power comes great responsibility, obviously, he realizes with great power he has a great advantage. And what can he do to, make more money, be a criminal overlord? So he makes a play to, be a criminal player.
Well, he doesn't become a criminal overlord yet. I'm assuming that's where he's headed.
That is where he's headed. Do you know anything about where the trajectory of this character goes?
No, I saw I glanced before we decided. I mean, before I read this, after we decided to read it, I glanced at Wikipedia and then I decided not to read too much. And I had the sense that he continues on as some kind of criminal overlord.
They brought back the V for Shocker's belt.
We're looking at the picture of Shocker and Constrictor and Pumpkinhead, or Jack-o'-lantern.
And for those who don't know, the Shocker is originally going to be called the Vibrator, and then they changed it at the last minute for unknown reasons, but he's kept the V belt. But most more modern comics have ditched it, but here it is.
And because this is a mature audience only comic, they lean into the language. I did kind of like it where the villain
does look like Mage.
Constrictor calls the Jack-o'-lantern Jack-off Lantern.
Yeah.
I do feel that he captured what these villains would really be like.
And I just want to say this. Me and the wife have been watching Picard recently, which has some moments. Well, you watch Star Trek The Next Gen, though, right?
Oh, yes, religiously at one point.
There's a super weird set of scenes where Picard is talking to, he's like ex-Starfleet at that point, but he's talking to like Starfleet admirals and stuff, and they just start cursing like sailors, and it's super jarring, and it feels wrong. But here, we're seeing the criminal underbelly of Marvel, and the fact that they curse and like talk dirty with each other makes more sense than when they don't, and it just works well here. And it's fun. I don't know. It's interesting to see, when you lean blue, when it works, when it doesn't.
When it doesn't. Right. It seemed appropriate here.
Mm-hmm.
And what was I? Anyway, I was a bit surprised, though, to think of him as becoming a criminal overlord, because at this point, he seems like an outsider who would kind of plague the mob as much as plague anyone else.
Well, he does. Yeah.
This artist, Kyle Hotz, leans heavily into the Kelly Jones style of art. I'm realizing the more I look at it.
What does Kelly Jones style of art mean to you?
Lots of deep shadows, exaggerated folds. Even the postures of characters look kind of like the posture of Kelly Jones characters to me. Of course, Kelly Jones got his starting point kind of slightly imitating. Suddenly I got a brain fart and I can't remember his name. The original Swamp Thing artist, Bernie Wrightston.
Just to say, some of those overstated shadows and whatnot are definitely the inker.
Oh, true. And the inker actually is a much more well-known artist. It's what's his name?
Inkman.
No.
Squiddy McGee.
No. He is. Oh, they don't list him on the cover. The inker is Eric Powell, famous for The Goon, amongst other things.
Oh, wow. I actually didn't know he ever worked at Marvel.
I didn't know he worked as an inker. His inking may or may not be a big influence on this. You look at this figure of the Hood, that looks so much like the way Kelly Jones would draw Batman and his cape.
Yeah. One thing I like too about the Hood is he has these superpowers, but he's always dual wielding pistols as well, which it's fun to see a criminal and a Marvel character just willing to use guns, I guess. That's not like the Punisher or something, because it's...
Right. Yeah, guns were a big part of this. I like that too. I like the whole depiction of a villain slowly thug gaining superpowers.
Mm-hmm. And we're on the third issue here, which is the one where he loses control and looks like as if he's possessed for a moment when he's in danger. Interesting little note that doesn't get played on.
Well, that's another thing. Like, another power appears just once in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So it does leave me wanting just a continuation of this story, and hopefully, all of this stuff being fleshed out. But I think you kind of hinted to me that other writers take it over and don't really follow up on this plot so much.
Well, there's parts that are followed up on parts that aren't. There's a Jeff Parker mini that follows this, and then Bendis makes the Hood one of his staples. So throughout Bendis's Avengers run, which is like 3 Avengers books over decades, or at least over years,
right?
Probably the Hood pops up a fair amount. And so...
And does he feel like this character?
I bet you get different answers from different people, and I haven't read all of it, so I'm kind of... It's harder to gauge, though, because the Hood is the villain in those books, and what's already an ensemble book, and then there's an ensemble of villains, because a big part of what the Hood does is kind of do a Injustice League for Marvel. And so he's there, but the amount of page time he gets is relatively minimal. So...
Right. I mean, this is a different view of a villain than you usually get, because usually the villains appear to be foils of the hero and plot, and they tend to be movers of the plot. And here he is not the mover of the plot. He is the person swept up in the plot.
He's not the antagonist. He's the protagonist.
And he eventually I like that he eventually takes control of the events that are out of his control, and he takes control of them. But
well, and I think you were talking about the switch earlier. I feel that's where the switch is in this book for him. It's not about having the power. It's about taking control once he has the power, which is this book's good.
Yeah.
It's good. There's parts to not like, but
It's definitely shows that, Brian K. Vaughan showed that he was a good writer earlier in his career. This might be after Runaways anyway. I'm not sure.
This is before Runaways.
Oh, okay.
I just looked that up.
But he does not have, like, the Brian K. Vaughan that I know from Why the Last Man and Saga is kind of a master of issue pacing. And he does a good job of issue pacing, but he doesn't stand out the way Brian K. Vaughan now does here. But he gets a lot of other stuff right, like we've been talking about, all the little details he folds in and making the characters feel more real and such.
I mean, Gore. Oh, sorry, side note. Gore was saying how he didn't like Next Gen, but he liked Babylon 5, which, hey, read Straczynski's Spider-Man run, but also DS9 is the better take on that. Sorry.
Well, I'm planning, after we've done our official podcast, I'm planning to go back and read all the comments, and we can respond to them and interact more. So again, apologies to people watching. We're mostly going to just focus on it as if we're just doing the podcast alone.
He says that. I might get distracted. What else was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say, I think this shows that Marvel should take more time to build up the villains. Like, what's one of the biggest issues of the Fantastic Four is that one where they build up Doom.
Right. Well, and, we've often discussed about how they could do more when things were compressed and not decompressed. They actually could spend many pages, which back then would be the equal of an issue or two now, many pages, going into what's going on with the villain sometimes, or sometimes do an issue from the point of view of the villain. But now that would mean doing a whole arc from the point of view of the villain, 6 or 12 issues, which is harder for most comics to do these days.
And in general, there's a motif I really like that happened a bit more, which is where you have the main character of an ongoing series gone for an issue or two, and all the supporting cast and all that just fill in And
Right.
obviously there's a bit of a search or whatever, right? But it forces you to see their effect on the world without them there. And it always does more to build up the main character and the side characters, and the entire series is richer for having that moment.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Circling back to the Peter Parker connection, I'm going doy in my head. The main character's first name is Parker.
Mhm.
So there's your clue right there that he's supposed to be villainous. And well, I guess not all those villains were not all the supervillains were Spider-Man supervillains, but at least two of them were. I don't know who the Constrictor originally is attached to.
I feel like he's a Wolverine villain generally, but he's
really?
he's a toss around Marvel villain in general. Like he was on Deadpool's roster during the Seinfeld knockoff era, or I should say the Christopher Priest era.
And there's a female villain, I can't remember her name now, who basically cuts people up with swords. And she was not familiar to me. Is she one you knew before?
I think she's introduced in this comic. So.
Okay, and then she's appeared.
And she
well, she's supposedly dead, so yeah.
Yeah, it's Marvel.
But yeah, so I guess it would be fun if he became a Spider-Man villain, given that parallel.
I mean, why not at this point? I have no idea where the characters ended. I think I saw someone in the comments mention that he's the current Hawkeye or related to Hawkeye somehow. I don't know.
I thought I saw on Wikipedia that he died eventually, but of course that doesn't mean anything. You can come back.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're not going to see. That would be a good one. It'd be better than what Nick Spencer's doing, but yeah. I think
the female villain is called Madame Rapier.
Which,
yeah, they make a joke about rape at one point in here too. One of the villains does.
Yeah, and that's something too. Like, I mean, I know it's Max, but like, it's still a Marvel comic and a rape joke and something like this.
I was shocked several times. Wait a minute, I'm reading Marvel.
Yeah, it's a
definitely was on the dark side, but I mean, it's weird because Marvel kind of was making a comeback with the Max line, but they don't have anything like that now. That's part of what saved Marvel, right? The Max line at the time. And that's why they hired, because Palmiotti and Quesada were the editors of the Max line, and they were given this freedom to do what they want. And when the Max line did really well, that's when they offered them the job to run all of Marvel. And I guess Palmiotti wanted out, and I'm making this up to it. I don't know why they split, why Palmiotti didn't stay, but that's when Quesada became the editor-in-chief of the whole line, based on the success of this Max line. At least that's what I feel like I've read several times.
Okay. Boo.
So I mean, it just seems obvious to me that Marvel ought to have a Max line, just as when I'm reading with my daughter, they ought to have comics that are clearly marked kid-friendly, because they do have kid-friendly comics, but they are just mixed in with all the other not so kid-friendly comics. Can't hear me?
You froze for a second.
Huh.
Kid-friendly comics, I agree. Usually Marvel Adventures denotes that, but
right. Well, no, but see,
just the savior.
Things like Squirrel Girl and Moon Girl and some other comics are more sophisticated than their quote Marvel kids comics, but they're still for a younger audience. And anyway, that's I guess a conversation for another time. I should go. I was not reading many Marvel comics at the time of the Max comics, so I should go back and read more, I guess.
What I'd say though, for those who maybe have something against Max Comics, this is more fun and more punchy than most Max Comics, I'd say. Like, trying to go back and read The Punisher, man, like, that's hard for me because he's just grim. But this is, I don't know, this struck my fancy.
I think there was a Ghost Rider series in the Max line that I read that I liked.
Probably.
Was Was Daredevil written by Kevin Smith? Was that part of the Max line? I'm not sure.
Was it? I think it was. I think Daredevil's part of Max for a while.
And I've heard that's good. I have not read more than an issue or two of
the Kevin Smith Daredevil run was, I mean, it was an arc, really. It was interesting, but it does make one of the characters just a whore. Okay. It definitely gets better right after Kevin Smith, because that's when you start getting other creators. That's when you start getting like Bendis and Brubaker, and it was this golden era for Daredevil again. So, yeah.
Chaos in Comics mentions Wonder Comics, which is vaguely a kid's line over at DC now, but it really isn't. And trying to read it with my 11-year-old, and none of those comics really work very well for her. At least the ones I've tried. So the Marvel comics like Squirrel Girl have been a much bigger hit with my young reader, but they aren't marked as separate from the rest of Marvel.
That's fair.
So, other thoughts on your end?
I kind of like the fact that he doesn't really have a costume. He's just has the hood.
Yes.
Well,
I like that he's literally a hood, a thug in a costume, and we see how much of, so his first thought is to use guns, whatever his powers are, and that makes sense.
Ironically, when we got to this final issue where they're at an amusement park, it really harkened back to Agent X for me. So, I don't know, just thought that was funny.
I haven't read Agent X.
Yeah, it's a lot of good Gail Simone comics back from when she was in her heyday.
There's a way that this reminds me a little, I don't know what, not really in any real way, but of The Secret Six from Gail Simone. Just that feeling of, well, you're following the bad guys and you're sort of relating to their situations in certain ways.
I don't think you'd like Gail Simone's Deadpool. The humor doesn't seem like your bag.
Probably not. We don't have the same sense of humor. I laugh at you, you laugh at me, but somehow it doesn't mean we like each other's sense of humor.
There's overlap, but yeah.
Well, I'm bummed that I can't just read the next arc written by Brian K. Vaughan of this. I think that's the real downside, especially because it has a cliffhanger that I'm showing here on screen now.
Yeah, and I forget if the Jeff Parker one picks up here or not, or I just honestly don't remember it.
Well, ironic if the last line in the comic is someone saying Parker, and then the next series is written by Jeff Parker. I guess it wasn't the last line, but it was.
Yeah, I know what you mean, though. That is pretty funny.
It actually ends with some people talking about, like, he's visiting his mother at the asylum. He'd hoped to get more money to bring her to a nicer nursing home, but he didn't. And the last thing that's said about him is, yeah, the dude's a psycho too. Pulled a friggin' switchblade on me once. He only stops in here every so often. I keep praying he won't come back. But that mother effer always does. And that's the actual end. It's, I don't know. It's a weird ending that really makes you want some more of this story. Because it is like Criminal to me, of that just sort of irredeemable character who's going to keep making mistakes and blunder through things and the like. I guess I should try the Jeff Parker version then, just to see.
I mean, it's a mini, so you're not like investing in much, and then he has sporadic appearances throughout Marvel. Yeah, I just I don't know. I it's such a cool addition to Marvel, and I wish that Marvel would take more time to maybe build up villains, because there's so many like failed hero starts, right?
Right.
But I feel like a kind of failure to launch villain sort of thing would eventually play in, because all these heroes need punching bags eventually, so you can kind of build it up. We saw this recently in DC when Orlando brought Silencer into Wonder Woman in the most artificial, terrible way possible, and just injected her ending into the Wonder Woman story that was going on. Because there's a kind of villainous character to use, but we can kind of play her anti-hero, more heroic angle and play it up with Wonder Woman and do something. And I just feel like these characters can exist in the universe. They don't always have to have a book, but if you give them a good origin story and kind of put them on a path, they can bumble around between books and be interesting.
Yeah, occasional miniseries, scattered throughout the continuity of miniseries about the villains and their lives would, if done, especially if done as well as Brian K. Vaughan can do,
right,
would really enrich the whole universe, so that when you see those villains appear in the Avengers or what have you, you have a different context for them if you're, a hardcore reader. It seems like DC tries more often to have comics about villains. They just recently ended Deadpool, right? Not Deadpool, Deathstroke. And
that was a run, though.
It was a very long, and I only read the first part of it, although I have a lot more issues that I need to circle back to. I was enjoying it quite a bit.
That's cool.
The way they write Deathstroke, he wobbles between what kind of person he is, I suppose. So that can be a bit frustrating to me. Just the way, Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy and a number of other villains, they have trouble keeping them in the villain camp.
Yeah, there's a whole push for Poison Ivy in particular that want to make her a hero, and
right. And there's a whole little mini fandom of Poison Ivy that just wants her to be a sexy hero that they all love.
Yeah.
Well, so we will be back and alive again with whatever we choose to read next. I'm kind of thinking about making you read Neil Adams' short run on the X-Men just before they were canceled in whenever that was,
How long is that?
1970 or so. I think that's about 8 issues. 8 issues of Roy Thomas and Neil Adams' X-Men. Could you handle that?
I think so, yeah.
I think it includes, well, maybe we need to read other issues that lead into it, then that becomes kind of a long run. But it's very close to the beginning of the introduction of what's Scott Summers' brother's name as a hero?
Havoc.
I was thinking Havoc was the wrong name. So it has a lot of Havoc in it. And
Polaris, right?
Polaris shows up, and Sauron, and the Living Pharaoh. I don't know if he ever came back again. It would be very interesting to me to see how you how you respond to he. I think that you're currently laughing at the most recent comment.
Yeah, I am. I
begged not to do Saga by Gore Vidal, who's starting a club of people who hate Saga.
That's Saga.
But that's for another conversation. But we'll talk after the show. But I think we might come back next with some X-Men of some sort.
All right. Well, do you want to do an after show then?
Yes, I do.
All right.
I was just trying to end the official recording.
Oh, sorry.
Might be a bit of a mess. So goodbye to everybody on the podcast, and we will be back.
All right.
Okay, let's dig into the comments.
Okay.
Should we work our way backwards or just...
Yeah, let's work our way backwards.
Okay. Well, let's start. Gore hates Saga. And there's a couple of other people out there who have...
Why do you hate Saga? Like, if you don't like Saga, that's fine. But what's the...
What I think it is, it's one of those books that everyone says you must love and you must read. So if you don't like it, you must resent that in particular.
Okay. Well, if you don't like Saga, read Ninja Turtles. That's all there is to that.
That's the answer to everything, right?
That is the answer to everything.
So, let's see. There's a way for me to show the comments.
Here, it's One Man Club. Please don't
do Saga, Damien and Matt. It's not a one-man club. I'm trying to remember who else was in it. Maybe Gore remembers. I think maybe Paolo. I'm forgetting Paolo's last name. Paolo, who's often in the comments and does
Can you
his own.
bring Gore's thing up again?
Which Gore?
Gore
This one,
Vidal.
the Two Saga.
So it's weird. His picture looks so different when it's blown up. When it's miniaturized, I always thought it was like Voldemort.
Who is that? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I almost think it's Phantomas. I think I learned about Phantomas from Gore, and then I read a Phantomas novel, which I enjoyed a lot.
Because of Gore, I looked up Gore Vidal debates with God, I'm forgetting the name, but a fairly conservative religious guy, and there's a whole documentary about it. I went down a whole rabbit hole because of that. So thank you.
Gore Vidal is a deep rabbit. The real Gore Vidal is a deep rabbit hole because he wrote a lot of books and was a TV personality. And
yeah, I went down the TV personality route. I didn't read the books, to be fair. But yeah,
I think he kind of represented a kind of politics that doesn't even exist anymore. But
there's, yeah, I know what you mean. But there's effigies, but they're more fringe. That was a sentence. Sorry.
So KS and Comics said you should tell what you should do so I can read it ahead of time. That's nice of you to care that much. I guess I will try to announce on Twitter when we decide, perhaps.
Well, you just said we're going to read X-Men, right?
Right. But we haven't figured out the exact issues because I need to look at it.
Well, I'm only, if it's 8 issues, I'm not pre-reading other shit.
Right.
I'll just dive in. At a certain point with that sort of stuff, you just have to draw a line and be like, shit happened before. It's X-Men.
Okay. Well, that's true. And they did handle it. And Gore says that Neil Adams brought sexy back for Bruce Wayne. So the big question will be, does he bring sexy back for Cyclops? Was Bruce Wayne and Cyclops ever
Grant Morrison brought the sexy back for Cyclops. And ironically, Brian K. Vaughan kind of dropped the ball with Cyclops. That's actually considered one of his least
Did Brian K. Vaughan write the X-Men? I didn't know that.
No, he wrote a 4-issue Cyclops mini.
And yes, Chris Sarda, Chaos and Comics, we were dying to respond. He says, you must love and read Saga.
I did.
And Chaos and Comics thinks it literally is Gore Vidal. Then he's a bit of a living undead Gore Vidal. Gore says, Saga, like Chaos said in another video, is one of the great comics of the last 10 years. I don't dislike it for Comicsgate reasons, more literary reasons. So I never thought you disliked it for...
Does Comicsgate not like Saga?
Well, I think one might dislike it for political reasons. It's certainly big into transsexual characters and that kind of thing. If you like Cyclops, you're a cop.
I don't get why people don't like Cyclops. He's the best character.
Well, I liked Cyclops certainly, when I first started reading, I'm a dinosaur, first started reading him. He was the character who was most like you, the reader, full of secret feelings that he couldn't express to anybody else.
I thought that was Beast. Robust vocabulary. Everybody's looking to you for advice. You're kind of hairy. Everybody loves you, but doesn't want to love you.
Like when I was 11. Beast had no inner life in the early days, I suppose now.
Cyclops was a stiff in like the Stan Lee days. I like Cyclops a lot more once you get to like the Jim Lee era and whatnot. I really like him in the whole Hoxpox thing and a bit before. I liked it when he killed Xavier. I thought that was well done until they ruined it. Yeah.
I'm scrolling back. So
yeah, totally.
Spencer just threw this bomb about Grant Morrison DuckTales. I can't even really imagine what that possibly like.
I want to see that.
That got applause from Chris, the Dark Avenger.
Woo.
And of course, Jackio was here, one of our...
he just commented, lol.
And I'm not sure what that symbol from Dark Avenger means.
It's a praise.
Oh, okay.
Right? So like, yes.
And some of these things are responses to things we were saying at the time, so I'm not sure what that means. Same guy, I think, meaning Kyle Hotz is the guy now doing cool stuff at DC.
Peter Parker's objectivist jerk. I love that. It's one issue where he totally is, and there's actually another issue
means
somewhere
like-
along the line where
like
they
Ayn
respond
Rand?
to it.
Objective
what?
means that you're like Ayn Rand.
Yeah, Ayn Rand's philosophy is objectivism.
Okay, I always
which
yeah, because it's also
Ditko.
libertarianism.
Yeah, Ditko was an objectivist
Right.
through and through. Except
Right,
it's
it's right.
weird.
Wrong is wrong.
If you look at his take on objectivism versus Ayn Rand's, it actually takes on some different attributes, and it's interesting because him as an artist living through and not living on government subsidies, he actually lived it more purely. So his is a touch more toned down. It's that whole thing's fascinating to me.
Sorry, then he asks, who was? Wait,
Yeah, Peter Parker who was almost a legitimate supervillain back in the day.
Right.
Yeah, because they were trying to play that. They were trying to play Spider-Man could be a hero or a villain, right? So,
and Chaos and Comics says, I feel like I should start from the beginning, but still comment on the chat in real time.
he didn't miss much. He missed like 2 minutes.
But it's, it is tricky when we're trying to do a quote show that we're going to record and go live, because everybody comes in at a different time. It's like, oh, what's going on? What are you guys talking about?
Yeah, it's all fine. You worry too much.
And so there was Gore when he realized we were talking about a Brian K. Vaughan comic. I wonder if Gore's still listening, if he dislikes I want to say V, the last man, X, the last man, Y, the last man.
I'm curious if Gore likes any other Vaughan comics that aren't Saga.
Right. Like We Stand on Guard.
Or a good one.
It is kind of surprising that Gore doesn't like Saga, just because one associates him with the more highbrow books, and Saga feels a little more elevated.
I never thought of it as highbrow.
No, I did. I mean, highbrow that somehow became popular is kind of how I view it.
Yeah.
But there are some lowbrow things in it too, I suppose. But overall, it's
The giant ogre with
not
balls.
aimed at people who want to just see lots of fight scenes and villains getting crushed and such.
There's a lot of stuff in that one. I don't.
But you like what you like, and he says he dislikes it for literary reasons. So maybe there's literary stuff in it that he doesn't like because it's the wrong sort of literary stuff. But he lives in Texas, so they do things differently there. I think he means they don't have the full moon when they're reading Saga.
Yeah.
Chaos and Comics lives in Vegas, and they do things differently there. I already talked about that one. Seems like there are a lot of people in Ohio in the community. That's interesting. A lot of people in Florida right now, maybe Ohio too.
Not a lot of people in Colorado.
There used to be a lot more people from England and Canada involved in the community, the quote community, than there is now.
I wonder if that's just algorithm stuff. Like if they started pushing geolocation to what's recommended to you more likely.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like I watch a lot of people in Britain and then they all sort of disappeared, but maybe. I wonder if Cats and Comics will want to read these comics now, or if we ruined them for him.
This one's definitely worth the read.
And then there was the discussion of Star Trek. I forget why it came up.
Because I mentioned Ricard for like a split second.
Because they're swearing in that, and it seems wrong.
There you go. What's your favorite sci-fi TV show?
Me?
Yeah, you.
That's changed over the years, so I don't know what it is now. It used to be Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Okay.
I did enjoy Firefly a lot. I can't. It didn't live long enough. But someone mentions Babylon 5, or Chris Sarda mentions Babylon 5.
Mhm.
That was really good, like in maybe the third and fourth season. It
Mhm.
was pretty bad when it started, and then it got horrible in its last season because they had wrapped up the story and then found out they were going to have another season. Something like that. Farscape I enjoyed at the time. I've enjoyed all these shows and briefly had them as my favorite, but now that I don't watch much TV, I don't feel like any of them are my favorites anymore.
That's fair.
I love the original Star Trek just because, it was like the first science fiction show I ever saw. Well, either that or Lost in Space. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I haven't, but yeah, I know a thing or two. Yeah, all right.
But I like Star Trek better than Lost in Space.
Okay.
Let's see. What are some more recent comments? Oh, we've already looked at that. War says, I've been watching Comicsgate channels to increase my blood pressure. Yeah, you mentioned that to me before, and they hate Saga. See, I've been avoiding those channels for at least a year now, if not longer, so I'm not aware of exactly what all their targets anymore.
I thought they mostly dried up.
No, they're still out there. And I think that the guy who used to be called Diversity in Comics and has a different name now, I think he still makes a lot of money from various GoFundMes and keeping his audience revved up over the fact that Mark Waid is evil and is gonna, and he's trying to sue him. And
Oh, okay. So Gore likes Y the Last Man, so he just doesn't like Saga. So there you go.
So it's just something about Saga.
That's cool.
There's aspects of Saga that rub me the wrong way, I have to say.
It's been forever since I read any Sagas, so I don't know. It definitely had a point where people were a bit more down on it because it just slowed down so much.
Yeah. And I did come to suspect that Vaughan didn't really have a plan.
Yeah, sure.
And that, it sort of implied from the beginning, because it was narrated by the daughter, that there was some big important arc and lesson coming from all this. But I think it's more of a random walk through Vaughan's imagination at times.
Yeah, I wonder about that, because Y the Last Man always felt like it was supposed to be planned, but I felt like the ending just dropped the ball so hard that it kind of ruined the rest of the series for me.
Did you like Paper Girls? Jackie O says it was excellent, and I enjoyed it.
It's a good one. I need to read it again because I feel like reading it month to month, like there's so much kind of lost in the milieu. And that book, yeah,
I got lost on a lot of the details, and so I wonder if I reread it all together, will I say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't hold together, or wow, this was brilliant. Paper Girls is great only 2 issues in, or I think he means he's only 2 issues into Paper Girls, perhaps,
or 2 volumes in.
Volumes in,
yeah. Which maybe that's how my wife got the trades, so I could just.
Paper Girls is so. I after reading it in individual issues, I wanted to reread the whole story, but it also feels like so much to dive back into that I'm kind of putting it off.
Yeah,
I'd like to reread Y the Last Man sometime too, but that's also a big, even maybe a bigger commitment than Paper Girls.
I'd rather read Wise again than Paper Girls, although right now I'm kind of itching to read X Factor again.
X Factor by
Peter David, the second
Peter
volume.
Okay.
Yeah.
I tend to forget that Peter David did that.
That's like most of what he did.
Speaking of Comicsgate, I'm a big fan of P.G. Wodehouse. I don't know whether you're familiar with that at all, but someone made a comic book out of P.G. Wodehouse. It's Wooster and Jeeves. Have you heard of them? They had a public TV show about them at some point.
Oh, cool.
But it's for a lot of people, one of the greatest comedic British novel series in existence, and I would agree with that assessment. So I saw this flimsy volume in comic book form at a used bookstore, so I picked it up and bought it. And afterwards, I look, and it's adapted by Chuck Dixon and edited by someone named Vox Day, who I believe is someone too conservative even for most comic skaters.
Yes.
Or too much of a
well, it wasn't necessarily the conservatism as much as he just played some bad politics. He screwed people over unnecessarily and was a dick to a lot of people.
So now I'm worried, by reading Wooster and Jeeves' P.G. Wodehouse books, am I somehow being a radical right-winger or something? I don't think so.
You're allowed to like books and not have to worry about every detail of who worked on what. Like, again, my wife's a big Cable fan. And for a while there was, oh God, I forget the name. It was one of the artists who's definitely Comic Skate, who worked on Cable for a while. And we got those issues, but like,
right.
Sure. And by the way, his art sucks. If you can't draw a cool gun for Cable, I don't know what you're doing on Cable.
Well, and someone earlier in the comments said, Casting Comics said Comic Skate is more popular than ever, which is interesting to me. But I wonder if part of it is they keep shifting what they're saying. So if you come into them later, you might not hear the whole context, and you feel that what they're saying is a little more reasonable than we do, who heard diversity in comics in the early days. Not that their whole story has changed a whole lot, but certain of their tactics have changed, and their presentation. And,
a lot.
If someone told me, "Hey, I love Wooster and Jeeves, and I'm publishing a Wooster and Jeeves comic," I'm like all about that. And then you could get sucked into some other things they're up to, I suppose.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're into independently published comics, you're going to run across them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so many people admire P.G. Wodehouse because he was just a master at a certain kind of comedic novel. But since I like it, you probably would not enjoy his comedy.
Sounds about right. Sorry, I don't know, something about that SJW comment made me think back to Star Trek, because we were talking about that, and all the people who are saying, Star Trek didn't used to be so preachy, but if you watch some of those original series ones, like they're super preachy. Yeah.
My God, it was very preachy. And and the Next Generation was so preachy too. And that kind of stuff would always seem like a weakness to me. Not that I was, had strong opinions about what they were preaching about, especially against, but I can see how Comicsgate can suck people in by saying, "Oh, we just don't want politics in our comics," even though if you know more of the context of Comicsgate, you realize they're actually pushing their own political agenda.
But there's a ton of them that have like Trump comics, so that doesn't even like add up. EVS is a good artist, but without an editor, he actually lacks some storytelling in his art, which was super apparent when people showed like some of his Cyberfrog pages and whatnot.
Probably became art for art's sake.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and then the whole thing is a mess because, just because someone's conservative, they may be slightly attracted to some of the things Comicsgate are saying and have some sympathy for them, or feel they're defending conservative fans, and then they get in trouble. Mostly.
Do you remember, like, I think it was like 2 years before Comicsgate, Bill Willingham got into some heat just because people found out he voted Republican occasionally?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was wild to me. And I was like, and people wanted to like denounce him and all that. Right. You call it canceling now.
And people
was
like
so
that
weird.
give power to Comicsgate or people, Comicsgate type of people. You know, they
Yeah.
give them, they just hand them the keys to the car, basically. It's just an incredibly dumb thing to do, in my opinion.
Oh, it is. And I mean, like, William's fine, and he's not doing any crazy whatnot. He just voted a little differently than some people.
Yeah.
And nobody hates Ditko, and he's
Right.
conservative. Or Buck Wild. I don't know.
And who knows who's conservative and who isn't? I mean, until you start interrogating all this stuff, I don't know.
And what's the use of some of it, right? Like, I think when you interrogate some people on some things, like what's the politics of Kevin Eastman? Does it really matter? Like,
Right.
he's been all over the map with different things. So,
and people usually, I mean, everyone wants to pigeonhole everyone now, but people usually don't have just one set of opinions on everything. That's checkbox down the line of everything. My father always voted Democrat, but he was a conservative Catholic who didn't believe in abortion and gay rights or anything like that, but he still voted Democrat. But
weird.
But so Ron Garney is conservative. He finds a way not. I love Ron Garney's art, so it would be horrible if he, in my opinion, got caught up in all of this. It must be tricky if you're strongly conservative in the comics industry right now because of the people purposefully driving wedges there, both Comicsgate and other people. But Comicsgate seems to be the active wedge driving in the fandom side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, and Mass Panther is saying that like you sparked some interest in the Spirit, which is funny because we haven't talked the Spirit yet.
Oh yeah,
we meant to.
Well, you should look into the Spirit, Mr. Panther, unless, you know, like I said, it has a lot of problems with its unthinking racism, I guess you might call it.
I mean, I think it's overblown at this point. Like, there's that character.
If I were a black person reading that comic back in the day when I was, you know, not allowed to use bathrooms in certain places and all of the rest of the pile of stuff on top of a black person, and then on top of that, you're portrayed as the way Ebony looks in that comic, it might have been pretty darn depressing.
I hear you. I mean, he's a caricature of a character. That's true, but everyone's very cartoon, and I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying, like, when people talk about the Spirit anymore, that's like the first thing they have to bring up. And I'm like, what about the fact that it helped revolutionize the industry and that like the character has his moments? And I don't know. There's just
I'm not saying don't read the Spirit or don't consider the Spirit great. I'm saying for some people it may be hard to read.
That's fair.
And the Masked Panther is an African American gentleman, I believe.
Yeah.
And it, you know, different African Americans have different feelings about that. You know, like some people don't want to read Mark Twain because of the language used there, even though Mark Twain was within the context of his times trying to make people aware of the humanity of these people who had been dehumanized.
True. Though, I mean, if you do read it, we'd love to hear your take.
Yes, we would. And there's a lot. There's way more to the character that is a caricature. But in the whole comic, there's way more than that. Of course, it's a very rich comic. I agree. His current work is easily his best. I remember really liking him when I would dip into Marvel. I think he was doing some Hulk comics at some point, but it was very different back then, and it wasn't nearly as strong as it is now. But he's an interesting artist. Yeah, and I wish Garney drew every modern. He's the best Conan. He's drawn the best Conan comics we've seen since he came back to Marvel.
Has Matt Herrera ever done a Conan comic?
Sorry?
Has Matt Herrera ever done a Conan comic?
Who's Matt Herrera?
Matt Herrera, Joe Matt Herrera, Battle Chasers.
Joe Mad, as people call him. I don't think he has. That would be interesting.
Feels like he could do something.
I'd like to see Kelly Jones on Conan. He did do a Conan related comic once for Dark Horse.
Oh, okay.
So Castle Comics mentioned is, I don't know if Thinking Critical is a Comics Gate-ish channel.
Sounds like the kind of name they'd use.
There was a Comics Gate channel or two that I used to try to engage with, but that was a long time ago. And then, of course, there was Captain Cummings.
Whatever happened to him?
I don't know. I mean, he removed his channel, then he came back a little bit doing non-comic stuff, and then he went away. As far as I know, I guess I haven't checked lately. It was weird I was looking at some old video of mine. I think I was looking for videos to show someone who wanted to know what my channel was about. And my earliest videos, in a way, are better representations of my channel than random videos now. Because that was where my, I was making my mission statements about comics. And since I've made them all a long time ago, I just sort of randomly talk about things now.
It's funny, after years of talking to you and other people, I feel like my shape around comics has either become more entrenched in certain areas or a lot more open in others. And so it's different.
Yeah, Picasso was an asshole, as a famous song mentions. Picasso was a jerk, but he's still a great artist, which has always been my kind of struggle with great artists. They usually are jerks. They're usually selfish people, whatever the politics are. I don't
Dave
know.
Cerebus, like that's a great point. And that's a big thing. This is something I've come around to, that I hear a lot of people pointing to whenever they find out some comics creator or someone did something less than ideal, at least to their mind, is creators shouldn't have to be paragons. And I also feel like people hold creators to standards that they'd hold like elected officials or something.
Right.
And what's the point of that? No, they're creators. They're not people you necessarily need to look up to. You just, if you appreciate their work or not, and you can call them out for being a shitty person at times, but enjoy what they put out. Doesn't have to be.
Right. But at the end of the day, look at what they've written or drawn and judge that. You know what I'm saying? The people who should judge them as people are their friends and their family members, not their readers. Because we get when we do learn about their personal lives, we get tiny little snippets and little angles and sometimes misstatements and rumors, or one thing they said that then gets blown up.
Well, like I remember a big thing about Brian Wood blowing up, and now a lot of people still judge him for it. But I asked them, well, what did he do? They don't even know what they don't like him for. So
he got drunk and tried to pick up women.
Which is that so bad? he also, I want to note, did a terrible job at it.
Yes, from all reports, he was really bad at it. If he was good at it, we probably would never have heard about this.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, unless people assume there's hidden layers of even more bad behavior, and there might be, but we don't know, or there might not be, or there might be all kinds of good behavior. There's also, people. I was a dick in college, but I'm not now.
Sure, you're not.
If I were in the public eye, could some people who knew me back then talk about some a-hole-ish things I did, and then I would for life be a bad person? Who knows?
Yeah, there's some of that too, right? Yeah.
I was homophobic in high school, as every single other male at that time was, because we had zero education about the lives of homosexuals at that time. All we knew was they were something strange and weird that would grope you, is what we were told. That's all we knew. So until you got a little older and had friends who were gay, and by the time I was 20, I was not homophobic, but I was when I was 15 or 16. I had no other knowledge of the world.
if I would nowadays get called out for the jokes I was telling in high school about gay people, but I learned all of them from my gay friends. So
Excuse.
I don't know. It's just different times.
Right. And if if my life story were written by certain ex-girlfriends, it would come out very different than if it was written by some other friends.
Mhm.
You can get so many views of a person.
Mhm.
So Chaos and Comics says Wood was doing low-level Weinstein stuff, though, allegedly. All I heard is that he was making moves on women who thought he could help their career. But I don't know if he even said, I can help your career or anything. He was just drunk at a party making moves on them and being turned down.
Yeah.
So,
and like Wood's like a creator. Like, I don't
right.
how much power does it really have to abuse?
People, literally. And wasn't even, as far as I know, saying any tip, you sleep with me and I'll get you a job at Dark Horse. He never, as far as I know, did anything like that back when they were publishing a lot of these accusations. There might have been more accusations that came out, but I haven't seen them anymore. But his career is pretty much gone. He does a few comics for some small publishers, and that's it.
Maybe what I heard was so much lighter than anything that you could equate to like Weinstein or something. So that's what I heard, but it's all hearsay and whatnot. And I like to, assume that the truth is somewhere between two stories generally, especially when it's two people who are drunk at a party,
Right. And there's there's the good side of Me Too, which was, let's not disbelieve women, but and that's very important. But then there's kind of, you've got to make a judgment between someone who's a dick and someone who is actually doing criminal behavior or what have you.
Maybe, I don't know.
There was any quid pro quo at all.
Yeah.
Just that he was, anyway, a drunk masher.
Yeah. No, I liked a lot of Wood stuff, so.
What did I see that he was doing? He's doing some, licensed product for somebody, maybe Dynamite or someone like that. I think that's it. Anyway, and maybe there's more to the story. I mean, so I'm not, it could work the other way around. People in the industry might know some really bad things he did that we haven't heard about.
I read one woman's account of what she said Wood did, and it just hit me as like, if you just at any point said like, this guy's being a jerk and just walked off, like that clearly would have been the end of it.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Yeah. And you're always going to have problems in a freelance creative world of what different people think their relationships with other people are about. And because the freelancers don't think of themselves in a position of power, but an unsuccessful freelancer or someone just starting might think that some more successful freelancer has this power over them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, everyone is, feeling fairly powerless. I'm probably not expressing that very well.
No, I got what you're saying.
When I was, a attempted science fiction writer and went to parties for just the pros, there was just all kinds of networking and hustling, that most of which just made no sense, but people do it anyway. I want to stand at the party. I want to stand in the cluster of people who are slightly more famous writers than me, as if that's going to do something for their career. And there was a person I knew at a party who avoided me because I was a low-level writer. But then, because I'd been published by this famous science fiction writer Robert Silverberg, and I was hanging out talking with him. Suddenly, she scuttled over and was a good friend of mine. And I saw things like that so often, not just involving me, but it's more vivid when it happened to me.
I mean, I've been at a few like comic industry like after parties and whatnot, and had some fun conversations. I remember one with me and we were in Kansas, but it was a local artist from my area, talking like Batman with Yannick Paquette, and it was a whole weird night. And like it's funny to see how that stuff goes, but yeah, I think that stuff happens, and you can make something of it or you cannot, and whatever. Sleepy fanzine.
Yeah. Okay. So this this is my deep shame. I talked about doing it, and I was gonna do it, and something caused me to procrastinate. And then the next time I started thinking about it, I felt like a lot of my comics community had gone away. There's like new comics community, but I don't know if they get me enough to do a fanzine with me. And I feel like the people I used to think of who might join in on the fanzine are just out of the scene anymore. But maybe I should try anyway and see what pops up.
You're in the magical land of Portland. Make something happen.
Well, the idea
I'll help.
It was a YouTube fanzine. It was just anyone who watches my channel or is aware of me could send in things to be put in the fanzine. I was going to make it family friendly, but other than that, whatever they wanted. And then, comic strips, articles, whatever, pinups. And it could be as bad artwork as you want. And then I was just going to send out free copies to anyone, again, who watches my channel and requests them.
It'd make more sense to make like a PDF though. You could just email people, and then it's all
I wanted to do it physical. It was a nostalgia thing for me.
Okay, well, there you go.
Here, I've been trying to buy the really primitive kind of fanzines that I got as a kid. I would order, and I can't find them on eBay because they're too obscure. But I did get this thing called Endeavor recently. Let me turn up the color here. I have control of my color. So I got Endeavor, and it has portions of it that are on Ditto, this blue stuff where you had to painstakingly use special Ditto paper. And people used to do comic strips on Ditto, which was meant, that it was on this very temporary kind of paper, and you could only publish a number of copies before the Ditto sheet sort of wore out, partially worn out there. But somehow, as a kid, and looking back at it, this was expensive. So it wasn't too expensive, actually, because there's some really expensive fanzines out there, and I just don't get them because I don't want to spend $30, $40, $50 on an old fanzine.
I don't think you have
to parts that might have been offset printing. I remember one fanzine where they Xeroxed some Fantastic Four pages and whited out the dialogue and then wrote their own dialogue in, and I thought that would be a fun thing to do. And nowadays it'd be much easier. But so I wanted to print it physically and send it out to people and have that experience of this little magazine that only a few fans have and know about. One fanzine, which I can't find, I think it was called Lock, Letters of Comment, but there's a slicker, larger fanzine like that. But it was just literally fans writing in letters and talking about whatever they wanted to. In the next issue, there'd be letters responding to the other fans, which reminded me of what YouTube, comic book YouTube used to be like more before we had the Hangouts so much. And you would say, Agent 42Q mentioned in his last video this comic book, and I have these thoughts about it. And then
more of the response video stuff, which I miss that. That was more fun. Especially, there's something to the limit of like 10 minutes or whatever that really...
It really did focus things in a nice way.
Who doesn't love old?
Right. Reed Richards was very sexist. Etsy. I should look on Etsy. That's a good fanzines. Nostalgia Ain't Cheap says 64-page special, and he is right. Yeah. If you look for fanzines on eBay, people are asking a lot of money for it. I think a lot of them aren't even selling, but okay, Gore's getting deep into the political side of it. I agree with him, but maybe I won't elaborate on my thoughts on that, especially in these times with the current bailout. Hello, 64-page special and Gore Vidal. They're just talking to each other, actually. So someday I should do a video, I guess, on all the fanzines I've managed to get, but none of them are as primitive as the ones I was hoping to find. But I'm guessing the ones that I got as a kid, I can't remember their titles, so it's hard to search for them on eBay. But
well, maybe we're fun to
a print run of 50 or something.
Maybe you could go find a current one to check out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should try to find current ones. Maybe those are on Etsy.
Or I know one of the shops in Portland sells them, so you could just pick one up.
Well, they sell zines, right?
Well, is that the same thing?
Fanzines. They are
okay.
They're very similar. Back then, they had some zines that they would call strip zines that had nothing but amateur comic strips in them. Now that would have a different connotation. Probably be a zines about strip clubs. And then they would have these letter of comment zines, and they would have zines that had interviews with pros, and some that were a mixture of various. I mean, I got off Etsy some of those back when the guy from Copra was doing them only on Etsy. I got some of those, and I've picked up zine-like things at Floating World Comics here. Do I have any?
That's probably what I'm thinking of.
But the ones I pick up are pretty elaborate. This one's done like in a newspaper style. I think it's just an art zine. I don't know. I can't even show it very well. Mass Panther asks if the Portland Comics crew is planning to make any videos again. Well, our initial plan was just to make videos, the roundtable video of us about once every 6 weeks. So I think we're just waiting. It would be nicer to meet in person. The last one we did was remotely, which makes less sense because the whole point is we all live in Portland, so we can meet in person. And we were having a weekly meetup on Wednesday evenings, which we had just started before the plague.
Bum, bum, bum.
It would be good for me to do a video, but like I say, the zines I have aren't really the ones that I want to talk about. But I'll do a video about them eventually.
Cool.
So, I mean, in that sense, did you think of yourself as making zines when you used to do some comics?
I never thought of it as a zine, I guess.
They were above the zine level.
I don't know if they were above. We just thought of them a different way. Zines have a certain like look and feel to it. We were doing a little like comic put together, a little more like I thought it was closer to like an ash can or something, I guess.
And I guess, I mean, I might be wrong, but the zines that I got as a kid, that I ordered through the mail, I thought of them as innocent and pure. They weren't trying to be something. They weren't trying to be hipsters or what have you, or they were just doing the best thing they could do at the time, because they wanted to reach out to other fans the way we do through YouTube.
I don't know. When I think zine, I think poetry. I think that's the main.
all poetry is zines, except some of them are zines for college professors and some are zines for real poets.
Mm.
Matt, what will be Dan Slott's Spider-Man legacy? This could be a good for another video.
Oh my God, he's on the book for a decade. I think he's the Claremont of Spider-Man at this point.
Didn't we talk about this in one of our?
Probably.
I think in our looking back at the decade comic, we talked a bit about your afterthoughts about Slott now that his Spider-Man days are past. And are you following his current work?
I was reading Iron Man up until they jumped to the 2020, and I just don't care. And I
don't hear anyone talking about it anymore, so I don't know if
I like his FF run.
Right, and he's doing FF, right, which I get the issues and don't read. I need to get on that.
But I might be dropping off FF and some other stuff. I'm thinking about rejiggering my pull a bit. Yeah, a lot of Marvel.
I have a feeling if this drought of comics goes on for a while, that a lot of people will probably switch to trades. Because you get into this habit of picking up your comics, but when they're interrupted like this, it suddenly seems to make sense to just wait for the trade.
Well, and what are they going to do when, over a month of comics have stacked up? And I don't know, be interesting.
Yeah, well, I guess it's Matt's personal opinion that he's the Claremont of Spider-Man. Maybe other popular opinion is to put him down now, which maybe goes back to Comicsgate, encouraging people to put him
down. Spencer's Spider-Man picked up for me, so I feel like Spencer writes his Spider-Man in seasons, and we're past.
Matt, you were not liking Spencer before, so it's picking up for you.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot better, but I think there's if you haven't dug deep into Spider-Man, there's much better to read.
Yeah.
Dan Slott's hated by more than Comicsgate. A lot of people don't like Dan Slott, and I don't know why.
I have to admit that he, long before Comicsgate, I kind of noticed that he had a bad attitude towards fans. He basically noticed the negativity and not the positivity.
Okay.
But that's also a common thing for a creator to. Anything negative said about you is like a megaphone in your ear, and positive things, because you're insecure, you take them with a grain of salt.
Right.
The zines at the time introduced me to American Flag, John Sable, Judge Dredd, and Warrior Magazine. So I wonder what zines those were. The other thing is the world of zines has all these levels, like there were zines that were slightly professional, and then there were semi-professional zines and things like Wizard eventually that went from zines to being these professional slick magazines. You think Claremont is a poor sentence writer? That's interesting. I have to go back and look at the sentence. Chaos and Comics does not like 70s and 80s comics. I don't think. It just does not like that writing style. Hey, speaking of comics, Portland Comics Crew, it's the king of Portland, Sam from Sam's Tangled Web. I think, Sam, am I right that you prefer Spencer to Slott, or am I wrong there? We were just talking about Dan Slott, and Matt feels he's ultimately the Chris Claremont of Spider-Man.
Slott, not Spencer.
Right, Slott. I have never read any JMS Spidey, well, except for a random issue or two. I need to go back. Maybe we will do that on some good JMS storyline for.
If you want to do that, I know just the one.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. So we should
coming home.
Okay. And is that
it's his first 5 issues? We could probably dip to the next issue too if you wanted, which is the 9/11 issue.
Okay, Gore's talking about comic scene, which would be kind of a fanzine turned into something professional because it was published by Jim Sterenko, and I loved Comic Scene. And for a while, I was paying pretty good prices on eBay to buy up a bunch of Comic Scenes. I should do a video about that. I also liked that they spelled it comics with an X. I always wanted comics to switch over to that X.
Well, that's the independent scene, right?
Originally, it was, sort of underground, and independent comics were called comics with an X. And I like that because it took them away from the idea that they were funny, the funnies. Originally the comic strips in the newspaper were called the funnies, and then they started calling them comics. And so the early comic books were either called comic books or they were called funny books. I am the Michael Jordan of the Portland comics. That's good. I need to start stretching and shooting for higher, throwing the ball higher. Sam, so I touched back to the slot thing with Sam since I just know he's read. Well, to me, it seems like he's read everything when it comes to Marvel, and especially Spider-Man.
Alrighty.
He says it's an interesting idea. He liked the earlier slot, and he's really enjoying Spencer right now. And you're starting to enjoy Spencer.
Yeah. Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, Sam, maybe you're just a Duke or a Earl or something. I don't know. I'm guessing Sam has been locked up in his house a lot. I just can't wait till we can all meet again at cafes and things. Well, should we wind things up, or?
Yeah, that sounds good.
It is almost midnight my time, which means almost 1 a.m. your time. The baby's going to wake you up in a few hours.
Yep.
Does he sleep through the night more now?
Yeah, off and on. He has spats of teething, which is what tends to do him in.
Hey, we can form a very good basketball team here in Portland.
There you go.
What's his name? Damien, the basketball player named Damien. A lot of kids I meet are shocked that I'm named after that basketball player.
Oh, right. Of course.
Damien, what's his name? I can never remember names when I need to. Okay, well, I'm going to be back soon with some kind of haul videos, and Sleepy Reader's right. I take a lot of flack among my peers for reading American Flag. They thought it was porn. We were in middle school. Were there some naughty bits in American Flag? I can't remember. There probably were.
I think it's a little more risque.
Thanks, Jack, for hanging in there. I know Jack is a very knowledgeable comic book guy, too. Damian Lillard, of course, yeah. So I'd meet these kids, and I say my name is Damien, and they go, huh? Because they think of Damien as this black basketball player. So then I tell them, well, yeah, he was named after me, and they don't believe that. They think I was named after him. Does he rap? Does Damian Lillard rap? I didn't know that. I've seen Damian Lillard play. I've been to a number of Blazers games, but I'm not really a very knowledgeable basketball person at all. 3 a.m. where the Masked Panther is. I always think that the Masked Panther is somewhere, I don't know where. I always imagine that you're in Maryland or Baltimore or, I don't know, somewhere in that middle East Coast area. I don't know why I think that. Well, good night, everyone, and we will be back soon.
See ya.
Thank you very much for joining me, Matt.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Thank you.
And broadcast.